Chapter 7 of The Gentle Grafter by O. Henry. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Walden. Chapter 7. A Midsummer Masquerade. "Satan," said Jeff Peters, "is a hard boss to work for. When other people are having their vacation is when he keeps you the busiest. As old Doc Watts or St. Paul or some other diagnostician says, he always finds somebody for idle hands to do." I remember one summer when me and my partner, Andy Tucker, tried to take a layoff from our professional and business duties. But it seems that our work followed us wherever we went. Now, with a preacher, it's different. He can throw off his responsibilities and enjoy himself. On the 31st of May, he wraps mosquito netting and tinfoil around the pulpit, grabs his niblick, breviary, and fishing pole, and hikes for Lake Como or Atlantic City, according to the size of the loudness with which he has been called by his congregation. And, sir, for 3 months he don't have to think about business, except to hunt around in Deuteronomy and Proverbs and Timothy to find texts to cover and exculpate such little midsummer penances as dropping a couple of louis d'or on rouge or teaching a Presbyterian widow to swim. But I was going to tell you about mine and Andy's summer vacation that wasn't one. We was tired of finance and all the branches of unsanctified ingenuity. Even Andy, whose brain rarely ever stopped working, began to make noises like a tennis cabinet. "Hi-ho," says Andy, "I'm tired. I've got that steam up the yacht Corsair and ho for the Riviera feeling. I want to loaf and indict my soul. As Walt Whittier says, I want to play pinochle with Mary Duval, or give a newting to the tenants on my Tarrytown estates, or do a monologue at a Chautauqua picnic in kilts or something summery and outside the line of routine and sandbagging." "Patience," says I. "You'll have to climb higher in the profession before you can taste the laurels that crown the footprints of the great captains of industry. Now, what I'd like, Andy," says I, "would be a summer's sojourn in a mountain village far from the scenes of larceny, labor, and overcapitalization. I'm tired, too, and a month or so of sinlessness ought to leave us in good shape to begin to take away the white man's burdens in the fall." Andy fell in with the rest cure at once, so we struck the general passenger agents of all the railroads for summer resort literature and took a week to study out where we should go. I reckon the first passenger agent in the world was that man Genesis. But there wasn't much competition in his day, and when he said the Lord made the earth in 6 days and all very good, he hadn't any idea to what extent the press agents of summer hotels would plagiarize him later on. When we finished the booklets, we perceived easy that the United States from Passadumkeag, Maine to El Paso and from Skagway to Key West was a paradise of glorious mountain peaks, crystal lakes, new-laid eggs, golf, girls, garages, cooling breezes, straw rides, open plumbing, and tennis, all within 2 hours' ride. So me and Andy dumps the books out the back window and packs our trunk and takes the 6 o'clock tortoise flyer for Crow Knob, a kind of dernier resort in the mountains on the line of Tennessee and North Carolina. We was directed to a kind of private hotel called Woodchuck Inn, and thither me and Andy bent and almost broke our footsteps over the rocks and stumps. The inn set back from the road in a big grove of trees, and it looked fine with its broad porches and a lot of women in white dresses rocking in the shade. The rest of Crow Knob was a post office and some scenery set at an angle of 45 degrees and a welkin. Well, sir, when we got to the gate, who do you suppose comes down the walk to greet us? Old Smoke-'em-out Smithers, who used to be the best open-air painless dentist and electric liver pad faker in the Southwest. Old Smoke-'em-out is dressed clerico-rural and has the mingled air of a landlord and a claim jumper, which aspect he corroborates by telling us that he is the host and perpetrator of Woodchuck Inn. I introduces Andy, and we talk about a few volatile topics, such as will go around at meetings of boards of directors and old associates like us three were. Old Smoke 'em Out leads us to a kind of summer house in the yard near the gate, and took up the harp of life and smote on all the chords with his mighty right. "Gents," says he, "I'm glad to see you. Maybe you could help me out of a scrape. I'm getting a bit old for street work, so I leased this Dog Days Emporium so the good things would come to me. 2 weeks before the season opened, I gets a letter signed Lieutenant Perry and one from the Duke of Marlborough, each wanting to engage board for part of the summer. Well, sir, you gents know what a big thing for an obscure hustlery it would be to have for guests 2 gentlemen whose names are famous from long association with icebergs and the Coburgs. So I prints a lot of handbills announcing that Woodchuck Inn would shelter these distinguished boarders during the summer, except in places where it leaked, and I sends 'em out to towns around as far as Knoxville and Charlotte and Fish Dam and Bowling Green. And now look up there on the porch, gents," says Smoke 'em Out, "at them disconsolate specimens of their fair sex waiting for the arrival of the Duke and the Lieutenant. The house is packed from rafters to cellar with hero worshippers. There's 4 normal school teachers and 2 abnormal. There's 3 high school graduates between 37 and 42. There's 2 literary old maids and 1 that can write. There's a couple of society women and a lady from Haw River. 2 elocutionists are bunking in the corn crib, and I've put cots in the hayloft for the cook and the society editress of the Chattanooga Opera Glass. You see how names draw, gents. Well," says I, "how is it that you seem to be biting your thumbs at good luck? You didn't used to be that way." "I ain't through," says Smoke 'em Out. "Yesterday was the day for the advent of the auspicious personages. I goes down to the depot to welcome them. 2 apparently animate substances gets off the train, both carrying bags full of croquet mallets and these magic lanterns with push buttons. I compares these integers with the original signatures to the letters, and, well, gents, I reckon the mistake was due to my poor eyesight. Instead of being the lieutenant, the daisy chain and wild verbena explorer was none other than Levi T. Peavy, a soda water clerk from Asheville. And the Duke of Marlborough turned out to be Theo Drake of Murfreesboro, a bookkeeper in a grocery. What did I do? I kicked 'em both back on the train and watched 'em depart for the lowlands, the low. Now you see the fix I'm in, gents," goes on Smoke 'em Out Smithers. "I told the ladies that the notorious visitors had been detained on the road by some unavoidable circumstances that made a noise like an ice jam and an heiress, but they would arrive a day or 2 later. When they find that they've been deceived," says Smoke 'em Out, "every yard of cross-barred muslin and natural waved switch in the house will pack up and leave. It's a hard deal," says old Smoke 'em Out. "Friend," says Andy, touching the old man on the esophagus, "why, this Jeremiad, when the polar regions and the portraits of Blenheim are conspiring to hand you prosperity on a hall-marked silver salver. We have arrived." A light breaks out on Smoke 'em Out's face. "Can you do it, gents?" he asked. "Could you do it? Could you play the polar man and the little duke for the nice ladies? Will you do it?" I see that Andy is superimposed with his old hankering for the oral and polyglot system of buncoing. That man had a vocabulary of about 10,000 words and synonyms, which arrayed themselves into contraband sophistries and parables when they came out. "Listen," says Andy to old Smoke 'em Out. "Can we do it? You behold before you, Mr. Smithers, 2 of the finest equipped men on earth for inveigling the proletariat, whether by word of mouth, sleight of hand, or swiftness of foot. Dukes come and go, explorers go and get lost, but me and Jeff Peters," says Andy, "go after the come-ons forever. If you say so, we're the 2 illustrious guests you were expecting. And you will find," says Andy, "that we will give you the true local color of the title rolls of the Aurora Borealis and the Ducal Portcullis." Old Smoke 'em Out is delighted. He takes me and Andy up to the inn by an arm apiece, telling us on the way that the finest fruits of the can and luxuries of the fast freights should be ours without price as long as we would stay. On the porch, Smoke-'em-Out says, "Ladies, I have the honor to introduce His Gracefulness the Duke of Marlborough and the famous inventor of the North Pole, Lieutenant Perry." The skirts are all aflutter and the rocking chairs squeak as me and Andy bows and then goes on in with old Smoke-'em-Out to register. And then we washed up and turned our cuffs, and the landlord took us to the rooms he had been saving for us and got out a demijohn of North Carolina real Mountain Dew. I expected trouble when Andy began to drink. He has the artistic metempsychosis, which is half drunk when sober and looks down on airships when stimulated. After lingering with the demijohn, me and Andy goes out on the porch, where the ladies are beginning to earn our keep. We sit in 2 special rockers, and then the schoolmarms and literators hunched up their rockers close around us. One lady says to me, "How did that last venture of yours turn out, sir?" Now, I'd clean forgot to have an understanding with Andy which I was to be, the Duke or the Lieutenant. And I couldn't tell from her question whether she was referring to Arctic or matrimonial expeditions. So I gave an answer that would cover both cases. "Well, ma'am," says I, "it was a freeze-out. Right smart of a freeze-out, ma'am." And then the floodgates of Andy's perorations was opened, and I knew which one of the renowned ostensible guests I was supposed to be. I wasn't either. Andy was both. And still furthermore, it seemed that he was trying to be the mouthpiece of the whole British nobility and of Arctic exploration from Sir John Franklin down. It was the union of corn whiskey and the conscientious fictional form that Mr. W.D. Howlett admires so much. "Ladies," says Andy, smiling semicircularly, "I am truly glad to visit America. I do not consider the Magna Carta," says he, "or gas balloons or snowshoes in any way a detriment to the beauty and charm of your American women, skyscrapers, or the architecture of your icebergs." "The next time," says Andy, "that I go after the North Pole, all the Vanderbilts in Greenland won't be able to turn me out in the cold. I mean make it hot for me." "Tell us about one of your trips, Lieutenant," says one of the normals. "Sure," says Andy, getting the decision over a hiccup. "It was in the spring of last year that I sailed the Castle of Blenheim up to latitude 87 degrees Fahrenheit and beat the record. Ladies," says Andy, "it was a sad sight to see a duke allied by a civil and liturgical chattel mortgage to one of your first families lost in a region of semi-annual days." And then he goes on, "At 4 bells we sighted Westminster Abbey, but there was not a drop to eat. At noon we threw out 5 sandbags and the ship rose 15 knots higher. At midnight," continues Andy, "the restaurants closed. Sitting on a cake of ice, we ate 7 hot dogs. All around us was snow and ice. 6 times a night the bosun rose up and tore a leaf off the calendar so we could keep time with the barometer. At 12, says Andy, with a lot of anguish on his face, 3 huge polar bears sprang down the hatchway into the cabin, and then—" "What then, Lieutenant?" says a schoolmarm excitedly. Andy gives a loud sob. "The Duchess shook me," he cries out, and slides out of the chair and weeps on the porch. Well, of course, that fixed the scheme. The women boarders all left the next morning. The landlord wouldn't speak to us for 2 days. But when he found out we had money to pay our way, he loosened up. So Andy and me had a quiet, restful summer after all, coming away from Crow Knob with $1,100 that we enticed out of old Smoke-'em-Out playing 7-Up. End of chapter 7.